evening. It is such a delight to be able to be with you during this gathering of the Mountain States Mennonite Conference. It's a part of the United States that I don't know very well. I travel a lot, but mostly in churches, I guess, east of the Mississippi. So I was delighted when Tim asked if I would be willing to come and join you, to learn with you, and participate in this gathering. I jumped at that chance, and it's good to be here. I want to bring you greetings from my own church, my little congregation on the west side of Goshen. It's called Berkey Avenue Mennonite Fellowship, so I want to greet you on their behalf. And I also want to greet you on behalf of Goshen College, which has been my work home for the past 25 years or so. Our colleges depend to a large degree on the support and the prayers of the students that come from our congregations, and we want to take that responsibility seriously. So thank you for your engagement with our church institutions. The theme for this evening of Transforming Hearts, theme for the conference of Transforming Hearts, is something that is, I think, at the center of the Christian gospel. I think it's at the heart of what the good news of the gospel is about. And I'd like to offer a few reflections this evening that begin with a kind of context, trying to get a sense of where are we at this moment in history. I am, by profession, a historian, so even though I like to preach, I can't preach without first trying to find a context. And to me, it seems like an important context for a gathering of the conference is to reflect a little bit on where we're at as a church, as a denomination, at this moment in history. And the truth of the matter is that from some perspectives, we find ourselves in a somewhat challenging moment in the sweep of our history. If you look just at some of the numerical data, you might know that despite a merger several years ago that brought two groups together, our numbers haven't grown that much. We are a missional church, and yet our numbers are kind of stagnant. You might have read that we tend to be an aging church overall. Not every congregation, but our average age is growing. Like many, many other Christian churches in the United States today, a growing number of people have some questions about denominational identity and loyalty. What does it really mean to be connected to this particular group? And we have to begin also by confessing that many of our congregations reflect some of the deep cultural pain and division that is part of our society today. The culture wars that tear apart our communities, that divide people into red and blue camps, whether it's about politics or sexuality or economics or immigration, whatever it is, we see those same tensions in our congregations. Now, I want this is going to be a weekend of encouragement, but I think if you're serious about encouragement, it begins not just with nice words. It begins with a pretty sober, maybe even realistic perspective on where we're at. We begin from a starting point of needing to be encouraged. And I think we have to name some of those realities. I don't know your setting, and it may be that the kinds of things that I see and that I sense in other parts of the Mennonite Church are not the reality in your setting. And if that's the case, I'm glad for that. Later on Sunday, I want to talk about why I have hope for the future. I really do. There's lots of signs of hope. But I begin with a kind of sober-minded recognition that we have some challenges ahead of us. Several years ago, I was, it's been 8 or 10 years ago now, our junior high daughter came home from school. She's usually a pretty happy and even-keeled child. But she came home, and you know how it works sometimes at the supper table. One thing led to another, and a little debate turned into a big argument, and some unedifying things were said around the table. And it ended with her either storming off or being sent, I forget exactly why, but she left and retreated to her room. And we all tried to just calm down a little bit. And sometime later, I don't know how much time passed, I was feeling like we needed to address this. We needed to make things right. So I went to her room and I knocked on the door, and I saw her hunched over a whole array of family albums, picture albums, that she had pulled off the shelf and she was looking at. And as we, I didn't say much, but I think I know what was going through her mind. It was, where do I fit in this family? Do I have a place here? Is there, this is a picture of who we are, but where do I belong in this? I don't really know quite what triggered it, but we began, I think it was a photo, we began to look at a picture of a family vacation, a camping trip that we had taken. It was one of those trips where everything went wrong. We were going to go tent camping and it rained for 3 days. We were soggy, sopping wet, and some strangers took us in. It was a long story, but it was one of those family moments in which, in the midst of crisis, there was some bonding. And we began to talk about that, and several minutes later, we felt, time passed, and I realized that our quarrel had been forgotten, that we had moved on. And there was something nice about that we had been sort of reoriented. But I recognized that the question she was asking remained. Do I fit? Where do I fit? What's the future? And I sensed something of that similar question for some of our congregations in this church that we love. For some of us, there is a sense perhaps that the family album contains memories of an identity of a family that is no longer, that is fading. And there's a sense of nostalgia maybe. And you wonder, the pictures in this album, do they have a future? And there may be some of you who are tired of those family albums and are ready to say, let's put those things aside and let's go out and let's find our own identity. Let's be freed from this thing that has sort of held us back. I've noted that many, many churches have a deep desire to be missional. That language, I think, is part of our congregational life by now. We talk about being missional. We want to be missional. And for many of us, again, I'm talking without really knowing you, for many of us, we recognize that for too long, the ethnic and the cultural and the family and the genealogical parts of our identity that have been so central to what it means to be Mennonite in the past have become barriers to people in our communities who would like to be part of our church. We have made the walls around our community pretty high. And so it's difficult for people who want to come into our church to genuinely feel at home. And in an effort to be missional, one of the impulses that I see is to say the particularity of our identity is a problem. And the next step is to go and paint Mennonite, cover up the word Mennonite on your church sign, and say, let's just be Christians. Let's just be generic Christians. Let's get rid of this dead weight of the tradition that has anchored us or held us back. I want to offer some reflections this evening on what it means, what it might mean to claim the good news of the gospel with a sense of joy and confidence, while at the same time recognizing that the Word is always made flesh in particular ways. I want to suggest this evening that it is possible to both have a confident and winsome and open and embracing understanding of the good news of the gospel, the arms of Christ that are outstretched to all, and at the same time say, and yet we are anchored and rooted in a particular time and place. And there's a particularity of identity that is a good thing. We find in the book of Acts, the second chapter of the book of Acts, a kind of account of the church's birthday. I mean, this is the beginning of that movement that we say we are continuing. It's a rich book. And in some ways it begins, there is a kind of powerful missional beginning where Peter preaches a sermon in a classic fashion. He preaches the good news of the gospel and hearts are transformed. 3,000 people are added to the number. And then in the next verses, we recognize it doesn't stop there. In the next verses, it goes on to describe the emergence of a community in which the people of God gather regularly as a particular people for prayer, for worship. They broke bread together. They prayed. They did the sort of things that congregations do every day. They lived in a life of community. And it says, day by day the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. It seems to me those are two crucial impulses that we need to always hold before us. The confident proclamation of the good news of the gospel and the life of the church, whose very quality of the relationships together is inviting and is in itself an act of mission. I'd like to reflect this evening. That was too long of an introduction. But it sort of frames what I'd like to say, not just tonight, but in the coming days. I would like to offer this evening some reflections on a theme that's almost so basic that it might even be embarrassing. I mean, I'm going to ask, what is the good news of the gospel? Why is the gospel good news? If you are someone like me who grew up in a Christian family, who was surrounded by basically a context of love and nurture all the growing up, who never had a dramatic conversion experience, it can be sometimes difficult to know how to put into words exactly why the gospel is good news. I know that for many, many years, I thought that if I just lived a good Christian life, if I just was a good person, that my people around me would sort of take note and maybe eventually invite themselves to my church. That you would just let your light shine and then people would come. But about 10 or 12 years ago, I realized that's not enough. It is not enough just to be the church. We also need to put into language what the good news of the gospel is. And so I'd like to begin by offering, in a very, very simple way, some reflections on why the gospel is good news. And I want to suggest why that matters to those of us who are looking for encouragement to be Christians in our particular context as the Mountain States Mennonite Conference. Let me suggest 3 quick points for your consideration. It's brief, but it's a start. The gospel is good news, it seems to me, because it offers us the possibility of being loved fully and unconditionally. There are a lot of people in our culture, maybe especially young people, who find themselves in a kind of permanent crisis of confidence, what the popular media calls a lack of self-esteem, a deep sense of inadequacy, a paralyzing fear of being rejected, of saying something stupid, of being ignored. This is not a small matter. I think all of us know friends who are seemingly trapped in endless cycles of depression or alcohol and drug abuse. Over the past 25 years, the suicide rate among late teens has tripled. And yet, from a Christian perspective, self-esteem is not the solution. Telling yourself over and over again that you're okay is not going to quiet the haunting voices of inner doubt. But there is good news. The good news of the gospel